death. Everyone knows that. Why was he put to death? Teaching Talmud, teaching Torah. The Bar Kokhba revolt, and here it estimated like 130 AD, would say really the Jews had wanted to rebuild their temple. Bar Kokhba was aligned with Rabbi Akiva. The Romans put it down hard. According to the Talmud, they killed so many people in Beitar, people know it's the Beitar today, that the blood ran all the way from Beitar to the Mediterranean, like 40 miles. The Romans, the Talmud is extremely violent. Talmud is a different language, but if you've read literature from Roman material like Caesar and stuff like that, you can. But it was forbidden. After that, the Romans forbid Judaism. It was illegal to be a Jew in Israel. It was illegal to practice because they thought it was going to lead to revolts. If you let Jews get together and study Torah, they're going to try to rebuild their temple and become an autonomous government. So they put down hard, and they made it forbidden. That's why the Jews had fled to Babylon. Babylon's the center where the people had autonomy under them, the Persians, and were capable of setting up synagogues and rabbinic centers and keeping the wisdom alive. You might have names people recognize of church fathers and different periods. I put interesting, if you look to 1240, one of the first disputations of Reverend Yechiel Paris and Nicholas Donin. If anyone's familiar, the more popular one is Nachmanides, the Rambam, and Pablo Christianity. They made a famous movie about that. These were disputations in medieval Europe about Christianity versus Judaism, and Nicholas Donin grew up in one of these small Jewish towns that were all over Europe, and the head of the town was this man, Yechiel. Yechiel, people didn't have last names then, and he had excommunicated him, kind of like Martin Luther. He was asking too many questions. He was denying the authority of the rabbinic sources, so he excommunicated him. Nicholas Donin converts to Christianity, raises in the ranks, meets the Pope, discusses with the Pope the Talmud, saying the Talmud is blasphemous, and it says horrible things about Jesus Christ and about Christians and all this other stuff, and it led to a debate with I don't know if he was there, but people know Louis the Ninth. Everyone's heard of St. Louis, right? The town St. Louis. Louis the Ninth burnt the Talmud. Louis the Ninth either personally presided over this debate over the Talmud, or had his church members, and he made a decree that the Talmud was blasphemous, and they went house to house to all the Jewish community and rounded up their literature and collected the Talmuds, and they burnt it, and then that led to expulsions of Jews. They have that 1290 England. A little bit interesting. After the Spanish expulsion, there's a revival of Judaism in Israel. Yosef Karo, I've read it, 1520. If you know, I put the Hebrew dates. Everyone familiar with the Hebrew dates? And according to the Bible, Moses created the world 5,776 years ago. When we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, that's the birth of the earth. And in Israel, I was reading recently an article. They were questioning whether it's forbidden according to Jewish law. According to a lot of strict people in Israel, who say basically we're all Christian, whether you realize it or not. We're all Christian, and they say, well, why? Because when you sign a check, you write the date. And say, even according to strict rabbinic ruling today, say it's you're not allowed to even sign a date on a check, because when you sign the date on the check with the date, that's an affirmation of Christianity. By saying you don't know the history, what does that mean? When we say November the 18th, 2014, that's an affirmation of Roman Christianity. You know, the November and the month dates refer to Roman pagan gods, and the January date refers to the start of Christianity. So it's saying they have the Hebrew dates here, which also you might find the rejection of evolution and geology. But I did put that because if you read Talmudic rabbinic sources, these are the ways the dates would be recorded. I want to make sure to cover this one topic of Daf Yomi. Two together, the Daf Yomi and the translations of the Talmud will somewhat go hand in hand, but I think that it's very important in Jewish history, and you see why Talmud is so widespread today, and why so many non-Jews also study Talmud. And to get to the note about Korea, if I can mention that now, if I put this, did everyone read that New Yorker article on Korean studying Talmud? You know, the ambassador to Israel, Yoon Sam-ma, said each Korean family has at least one copy of the Talmud. Korean mothers want to know how Jewish people became Jews. And they said it's probably because of the Talmud. And actually, there's quite a bit of scholarship. Korea's mostly a Protestant Christian country, and they might look at it two ways: either to understand Christianity better, or to understand the wisdom of the Jews. But in general, when they study Talmud, they're more studying things like this, that have just excerpts of stories and legends. But some of them do could tell you exactly the complicated halachic discourses and say, well, because Moses said this, the Jews wanted to observe Moses properly, and they interpreted these passages, and there's great scholarship. And but if you look on the timeline, I put here 1923, 5683, Rev. Mayor Shapiro, who I mentioned, was very prominent in Poland. He was a member of parliament. I heard that when he founded his yeshiva called Chokmei Lublin, I don't know if anyone's heard of it. There's an old man in my synagogue near my house in Southfield, Young Israel Southfield, that was a student in Chokmei Lublin before the war. And Barris, people refer to him.
What year was that? I'm sorry.
1923, 5683, Rabbi Mayor Shapiro. A very prominent man, secularly and religiously. So he said when he founded his yeshiva, Chokmei Lublin, the town of Lublin, every train ticket that day had a special notice to people: today marks the establishment of Yeshiva Chokmei Lublin. So like you picture in Detroit, or New York City, people have train tickets. So the founding of his little rabbinic school was such a prominent event that every single train ticket in the whole city, people still have copies of these. You could find them noted. Its founding. I have some of these, like 1945 Sima Shas. People have heard of the Sima Shas. It's a pretty popular event now. They fill up Madison Square Garden. People go to that. It took off slowly. I go back, one last thing I put interesting here to mention. It's 1700. Johann Eisenmenger. Anyone ever heard of him? Anyone ever peruse anti-Semitic, neo-Nazi websites or anti-Semitic literature, and you see they quote the Talmud? You're saying like all these horrible things that you picture, like Sharia law, like people write anti-Islamic things and say Muhammad says this. He was one of the first translators of Talmud into German. He was a would-be convert who studied with Orthodox Jews for about 19 years, and then he decided against it, and he decided he's going to expose these Jews. And he wrote, I heard estimates that it was 3,000 pages long. of sources from the Talmud and rabbinic sources of everything embarrassing about religious Judaism. Like, can you marry a 3-year-old girl? Is it okay to kill somebody for, as I said, the Talmud's pretty violent in those days. Like, the punishment for almost everything is death. And there's a lot of things like you would look at as like, there's no way our ancestors did that. But maybe you think like the Mayan human sacrifices, the Roman slavery, like that's what the Talmud says. But he wrote a 3,000-page book, Judaism Unveiled, that had all these embarrassing statements, and it's still available today. That was probably the source for a lot of German anti-Semitic literature, where they collected these things. Like, no, you don't know what the Jews really believe. They believe this because this translation. That's actually the first translation. In 1900, there's an English translation by a conservative rabbi in 1903. This guy, Michael Levi Rodkinson, in Cincinnati. 1965, the Steinsaltz Talmud is put into Hebrew. As I said, the Talmud is in Aramaic and it's cryptic. So it's the first time it's translated into Hebrew with punctuation and explanations. And actually, he was not very popular. A lot of the rabbis, you're not allowed to do this. The Talmud is only meant for the sages. It's not a good thing that people should know this information. But or 1935 to 52, Dr. Isidore Cencino Talmud. People see this as a very common Talmud. A lot of before Art Scroll, a lot of synagogues had these. He made a pretty nice translation with a little bit of commentary of the whole Talmud, and it's pretty popular. Daf Yomi these times. So you're looking here at 1970. Have anyone heard of Or Samayach or Esha Torah? People know Or Samayach? I went to Or Samayach. Rabbi Jacobowitz sent people to Or Samayach. Esha Torah is here in Detroit. Both of these places are now here in Detroit. Unfortunately, the news that a rabbi from Esha Torah was murdered a few weeks ago in Jerusalem was in the news. 1970, Or Samayach is founded to teach secular Jews about, try to make an orthodox teaching about Judaism, including Talmud. So you have adults learning Talmud. And there's a split off to found Esha Torah, and now there's probably 100 different type institutes where if you're an adult Jew or someone who wants to convert and didn't grow up learning Talmud, you could go, and there's Esha Torah in Oak Park. Or Samayach is here, and they have embassies here in Detroit. Now you have maybe like Rabbi Levi Burnham, for example, is from a different movement. But that type thing, okay, you're a Jew, you didn't grow up knowing this stuff, you would have been better off had you known it. We're willing to teach you now. And you say 1975, Simas Shas, first time in Manhattan. This is the 7th Simas Shas from 1923 to 75. 5,000 people show up in Manhattan to attend the Simas Shas. They say in Israel already, tens of thousands of people have been doing it. But it takes popularity in America. 1984, people know the Shakinsi Talmud. These books you find in almost every synagogue now. A wealthy man from Ohio, people heard of the Shakinsi family, real estate moguls. $40 million was spent to translate the Talmud into English. And if you look, a lot of times they have multiple pages, so they have 4 or 5 pages of translation, commentary. I heard when they were doing it, they were paying rabbis $100 a page to do that besides the editing. So it's 73 volumes, and a lot of times there are 4 or 5 pages per page. It was a $40 million project, finished in 1995, covering the whole Babylonian Talmud. And more recently, they've started on the Jerusalem Talmud, which I mentioned. The Jerusalem Talmud isn't as popular. There's not as much wisdom in it because of the Roman oppression. So in Babylon, the Jews had much more freedom. So the Talmud grew in Babylon, not in Israel. But there is a Jerusalem Talmud, and Art School is in the middle of translating this now also.
Let's do from all the editions. I mean, there was one that was 1735 but there's a whole bunch of different editions.
These are translations.
The translations, yeah, I understand.
I also mentioned editions. I mean, the first printing, I brought this book. It's debated actually. What is the Talmud? You know, what's the correct? In Hebrew, they say girsa. The words. A lot of times there's debate. 1520, the first Talmud is printed. The Bamberg Talmud. So there is different editions of the Talmud itself. A lot of times, the Hebrew Talmud, you'll have notes on the side that question what's the right word, and some, right, there were censors when the Romans already were censoring the Talmud and breaking into people's houses and pulling them out, make sure that they didn't have things. And when it first started printing, it was immediately censored. But these now are all translations. So
What's the strong translation?
Talmud wasn't written until after the 200 after the mission. What version of Talmud?
Well, Talmud was compiled, not written. So I mean, the Talmud it's a compilation of 1,000 years of wisdom. It's not really written.
So, but there were a lot of different sources just floating around, and then they condensed it into one kind of volume.
Yeah, I have that in the Talmud, in the timeline. If you look at 350 Abai and Rabbah, if you learn the Talmud, I mentioned if you look at modern day politics, or like a law firm, a bankruptcy, real estate, financial arm, patent law, or like in politics, you might have people who are expertise in healthcare, foreign policy. The Talmud discusses basically everything. In certain areas, there's sages, everything that was known at the time. So there's certain sages that are only brought down in certain areas, and there's certain great sages that basically had an opinion about everything. Everything, like Congress or something, there's 600 agencies of government and so many different issues. Great scholars had opinions about all of it. About 350 in Babylon, you have the heads of the academies of Bai and Rabbah. If you read Talmud, they're all over. And at that point, it was already coming down to a collection. Those guys had, in theory, known all of the wisdom of the previous sages, studied it, and then by 500, it's compiled. And then like 600, there's Ravina and Rav Ashi, there's additions made to it, and editing. And it said there's other books. A lot of the Talmud is 2,700 pages. There's probably about another 4,000 pages of known existent books from the rabbis of those period of time that didn't make it into the Talmud.
So the written version is going to compile everything, and all the scattered sources of knowledge. It's not condensed into some one common thought.
Yeah. And a lot of it's unclear. The interesting thing in the Talmud is it brings down discarded opinions. So the debates will bring down, okay, there's what should we do on this issue? When does Sabbath start? Does it start when the sun disappears from the sky, or does it start when the light from the sun can't be seen anymore, and you can see 3 stars? And there's different issues in between. And a lot of these issues are still unresolved till today, and there's different schools, like we do it this way, other people do it that way. I put here on the timeline, people might not know, in 922, there was a dispute on what day Rosh Hashanah was. And you think like, here's, people have heard of the Julian calendar. People have heard of